This podcast is brought to you by the letters KYLT. Well, I guess we can call this season 2 of the golden age of top 40 music at Missoula's KYLT. But we'll start this season 2 with a little bit of a twist and start the season with Denny Bedard. Yes, Denny Bedard from Kiss Country, KYSS, also the voice of the Lady Grizz. But there was a time and a place when Denny had another name, maybe another life that we can talk about at KYLT. Denny Bedard, welcome to the show today.
Yeah, thank you for the invite, Scott.
Yeah,
this is cool.
Absolutely. I want to talk about your start in radio. I want to know a little bit about, I don't know your origin story. Are you a native Missoulian? Where
Never
did you
went
start?
away. Never went away. I was born and raised here, and
That's awesome.
went to college right out of high school.
Okay.
And
which high school?
I went to Missoula Hellgate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you go to school with any of the guys at KYLT that you ended up working with later? Like, the Argos or?
Well, yeah, actually, yeah. When I was about halfway through my freshman year of college, again, I went to college right out of high school. So this is just really early 73, about second, we didn't have semesters then, we had quarters, second quarter, I believe. Was working my way through college at a local pizza parlor, Shakey's Pizza. You probably remember that name.
Of course.
And me and a couple of my coworkers, we were rushed by one of the university fraternities, and I wish that I could remember exactly how that connection came to be, how they found us and wanted to talk to us, things like that. We ended up pledging a fraternity.
Okay.
And I was still living at home, but I wanted to move into the fraternity house. It was a beautiful house. In fact, it used to be a sorority, so it was way swankier than bunch of college dudes deserved. And it was just full enough that the next guy in had to live with somebody. He had to have a roommate. So I picked a roommate. His name was Randy Morger. And I think I picked Randy Morger just because I knew him on the radio as Mark Randall. He was what they called a weekend warrior back then. When you work part-time at a radio station, you work Saturdays and Sundays, and they were typically at least 6-hour shifts. So that's how I knew who he was, but we just got along very, very well. And sometimes on a Saturday night, if I didn't have anything going on, security rules were quite lax back then. Let me rephrase that. There were no security rules. You could walk into the radio station and a lot of people did 3 doors down, the Squire's Pub, but I think he worked 6 to midnight on Saturday. So I'd go down and, hang with Randy and, and he'd, okay, here's how you cue a vinyl record, and here's the buttons that fire these cartridge machines that play the commercial. I learned how to run the board. I learned to basically do everything but talk. And I think he had me cut a little demo tape one time that he gave to the station's program director at the time, Vern Argo. And when the job came open, it was the all night shift. It was midnight to 6, Monday through Friday, and I'm still in school, and I cannot not take that job. I have to have that job, and my grades took a beating, and I somehow managed to limp through because it was late in my junior year because I was on the 5-year plan, working my way through college and everything, and I survived, but I did not want to turn down that job, thinking, well, would they ever ask you again if you said no the first time? And so I ended up basically being a full-time employee of the Scotty Broadcasting Company, KYLT.
That's right. Yep.
And who are you going to be? Well, everybody had a first syllable name and a 2-syllable last name. Mark was easy to say and memorable, and Willis was my dad's name. And so that's how that happened.
There it is. Okay. Connect the dots.
Yeah,
That is awesome.
Not much else to it.
So at what point do you get off midnight to 6 and, secure a daytime shift? Was it so let's go back to school really quickly. What were you taking in school?
I have an English major and a history minor. I think I
Okay.
have maybe 4 credits of radio TV. It wasn't something I was pursuing. I thought I wanted to be a teacher. And at the time, everybody wanted to be a teacher. And I just decided that it wasn't so much that I was totally absorbed and enamored with this new radio broadcast career, but I was learning things on my own. And I just thought, I don't want to move to a real remote little town in Montana. And a first year, especially somebody with if as an English teacher, things like that, and not qualified to coach any sport that they might offer. Maybe I could have coached tennis. I don't know, but it's just not something I never pursued it. I never looked into a teaching job around the state of Montana. I just stayed with the radio. I got my degree. I graduated. And I continued to moonlight at the pizza parlor. And so I have just always been kind of a workaholic. I guess it's ever since my early 20s, it's like a measurement of my worth. But at least it was always something that I liked doing. The Shakey's Pizza was a pretty fun, funky place to work. And
It's
I just,
legendary.
yeah, it was one of the very early franchise type places in
Hmm.
Missoula back in the
Yep.
'70s that people heard of it. "Oh, Shakey's is coming to town," and
So what
yeah,
did
it
you
was,
did you make the pizzas there, or are you washing
yeah,
dishes, or what are
yeah.
you doing?
I was one of the kitchen prep guys, and
Okay.
there weren't a lot of different jobs there, Scott. You either prepped the pizzas or you poured the beer.
And I did
Well,
both.
you marinated the chicken in the back. There weren't a lot of different facets of a job at Shakey's, so you did a little bit of everything.
That,
It was it was a
you
good
kinda
job.
touched you really kinda touched on something that Keith and I talked about too, and you saw it with I think it was a lot of people in Missoula radio, is that if you wanted to work in radio, it almost required 2 jobs. I know it was the same way for me, but,
Yeah,
I mean,
looking
once you
back,
get a little bit of that
yeah.
in your blood, you just don't wanna leave radio.
Yeah. And if there had ever been an extended period of, downward trend with what I was doing, then I might have reevaluated things. But for the most part, it was either stay even or at least uptrend and move up a little bit in the world.
Yeah,
It's a little unfair to say this about my employers back then, but I was never trained. I was never coached. I was never encouraged or discouraged to do this, that, or the other thing on the air. I did not get any direction, guidance, or leadership from management, and that's just kind of the nature of who they were and and what the business was like. At the time, there were only what, 3 or 4 radio stations in Missoula, and the sales staff, and it was a very good sales staff.
yeah, I remember that.
They could leave in the morning and come back in the afternoon with a ginormous stack of orders, and they ran a phenomenal number of commercial minutes that you would never get away with now. But that's what they did, and it was very, very successful. But they didn't necessarily share the wealth. And once some competition in terms of music intensive FM moved into town, things started to change,
Right.
and local ownership decided to sell to a couple of they weren't based in Missoula. They were out of market ownership, and it started to lose its feel good vibe, its persona. And I actually quit. I walked out. I walked out.
Of Kilt?
Well, we had just put on a rock FM station, KZOQ, which it was called, I think it was called Z100 from its inception. It still is called that now. And they moved me over to that one. And I was doing mornings over there. And one afternoon, my program director calls me in, and I can't remember the name of the outfit that acquired KYLT, but in just a very, very unemotional, matter of fact manner, brings me in on a Friday and says, our company thinks that with this format, and we can only really afford one announcer, you're best suited to work 6 to midnight instead of morning midday. So we're moving
Mhm.
you to nights. And I just said, well, no, you're not. And that's how
Right.
I ended up leaving there.
Okay.
And by now, we fast forward to my other moonlighting, a job that I was doing at the same time, which, for a radio announcer was a pretty good side hustle. I worked at a record store.
That's right. I do remember this now. You worked at was it at Eli's or Budget? Budget?
Budget, very good. Yeah,
Budget. Okay.
yeah.
Yep.
But Budget Tapes and Records, that's another fraternity brother connection. I had a fraternity brother who ended up buying the place.
Fred?
And he'd ask me, he says, do you still would you have any time to kind of help out around here? I mean, I think it'd be a great fit to have. I said, yeah, yeah. So I was working at the record store, and I think I'm working at the record store the same afternoon or evening that I walked out, and telling my manager at the time what had happened. In walks a sales rep from the new FM competition. They weren't brand new by then, but they'd been around for was it was KDXT. It was called XT93. It was music intensive top 40 format, but it was on the FM band, and they were getting a lot of traction. And I knew her from, I guess, radio people just know radio people in the same market. We were nodding acquaintances, and she just asked me how things were going. I said, well, they're not going real good. Here's what happened. And she says, "Oh, okay. Well, sorry to hear that." And she got her order from the manager, whatever, for advertising. And I'm still working there when I get a phone call from their manager, from her, saying, "My manager would like to talk to you. Can you come in Monday?" And so I was out of work for a weekend, basically, on broadcast, because he said, "Well, here's what I have in mind, because I know I've heard your commercials. You do really good commercials, and really about all I can spare right now, or what I have in the budget and what I have in mind, is I need somebody to help with copywriting and voicing commercials and stuff." And I've always been, I guess that's the English major in me. Maybe that's where it kind of paid off in going to college. I've always been pretty good at that, and so I started doing that. And they had a fella on XT93. They also had the AM country station. They were Grizz Country, KGRZ, and XT93, doing business as, I believe it was called Wind Point Holding Company. They were a division of Johnson Wax at the time.
Oh my gosh.
Corporate ownership was Johnson Wax, but they had the two stations, and they had a fella doing morning. By then, they got a little more. They were able to get some more live announcers on air. They had a morning drive guy. Name was Barry Morris, I want to say. And Barry was he was a little bit on the quirky side, but a good dude. And I'd been working there for a couple of months, and my desk was right outside the studio door. And he says, "I listen to you talk back and forth with people. And says, you seem to know quite a bit about sports." I said, "Well, I guess I know a fair amount about sports." He says, "I know nothing about sports, but we need a sports cast. And since you get in here earlier enough in the morning, would you be willing to come in and do a couple of minutes of sports?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess so." The AP teletype's right there, and my desk is right here. And so I don't remember what time we did the sports, but it's time for me to be the XC93 sports guy. And I mean, it is time, like 10, 9, 8. And he said, and Barry says to me, what do you want to be called?" Oh, God. Yeah, well, I guess I'm just Denny Bedard. And so, Mark became Denny, and I worked my way through that identity crisis. But that's how I first started there. And he moves on. But before I know it, I'm the program director of the station. And
Thought you were PD at some point, so that didn't take long.
it did not. A different owner acquired the radio station. It was not a pleasant person to work for. And but now I'm with, I can't remember what he called it now, but we're no longer owned by Johnson Wax, and we have made our way to about the little past the mid 80s by now.
Okay.
A fellow went to work there as a sales rep, who I thought the world of him. I thought so much of his sincerity. He was genuine. He was talented, and he was just a hell of a sales guy. And his name was Bob Toole. Well, Bob works for them for a few years. We become quite close and really liked and respected each other a lot. But Bob accepts the job as the general manager of what was a standalone radio station in Missoula. I think there were 5 AMs, maybe 4. They were one of the AMs, KGVO.
Okay. That's right.
So
Completely
Bob
standalone, right.
yeah, Bob goes to work for KGVO, and by the late 80s, almost 90, I'm pretty disgruntled with management and ownership at XT93. And Bob and I start talking, and he says, "Are you familiar with the station?" I said, "Yeah, kind of." He says, "Well, we're really having a problem. We don't know what we want to be. We do a list, we little of that. We need more direction." I said, "Okay, well, I would be interested in that." He says, I'm a little embarrassed that it's not much of a salary. I don't have much of a salary in the budget, but if you would like to do some sales, you could supplement with commission." I said, "That's something I kind of like to do too."
Nice.
And so I went to work for them, and they had a morning news block, and you probably remember the name Ray Nicolai. Ray Nicolai, the news guy, had moved to KGVO from KYLT. Mick Colleen, a sportscaster, had started working for them, as did Fat Dad. So now I'm back to work with 2 of the guys that I started my career with about
Right.
12 years prior. maybe long, no, longer than that. And Bob Toole, the GM, was right. The station it didn't have an identity. What they would do is do a 2 hour news block in the morning, like 6 to 8 a.m., I believe it was. And then they would do the same thing from 4 to 6 p.m. So between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m., they were playing kind of this, I don't know, quirky, a fair amount left of center adult contemporary music that, no consultant, no playlist, just, this is just my manager, Bob Toole, throwing darts at the board as to what he wanted to do music wise. And he said, so we don't know if we should be music or more talk. I said, well, I don't think you can be music. We got to, if we're going to be anything, we need to be a news talk radio station. And I said, I did, and this was still, 1990, 91, Scott. There wasn't that much of that stuff to choose from. But I said, but we were syndicated. That was the other thing. We were syndicated in the evening. We had Larry King was around. And so we had that and somebody else, maybe Sally, Jesse, Raphael. I don't know. So
Yeah.
it was local news, kind of weird adult contemporary music, local news, evening talk shows. And I said, I think there's enough out there now that we could make this a 24/7 talk. He said, okay, what'd you have? I said, well, there's this dude named Rush Limbaugh. And I think that might be a pretty decent midday cornerstone. So if anyone hated the late Rush Limbaugh, you can blame me for bringing him into the Missoula market because I did. And then there still wasn't a lot in the afternoon to pick up. But we finally landed on some grounded hosts that were going to be there for a little while, and so we made it a news talk station, and the response was really rather overwhelming. I can't believe this sounds like a big city radio station. I can't believe this. We love this thing, and
That's amazing.
stayed with it until, well, actually, I did stay with. So now I'm with KGVO, and KGVO is purchased by Western Broadcasting, which was two radio stations in Missoula. They had what was then KLCY, an AM station,
Right. 9:30.
soft adult contemporary. And they had their country giant. They had the Kiss FM Country,
Right.
and that was owned by two guys who have become dear friends over the decades, Mark Ward and Dale Moore, doing business as Western Broadcasting. And so we had those two. So we had KLCY and KLCY and Kiss FM. We had those, and now we have KGVO. So we're a 3-station property. By now, the FCC is really that was about 1994, I believe, 93 maybe. And so I get over there, and they didn't want me to be a sales rep anymore. They wanted me to be an announcer on the country station. Took middays on Kiss FM. So I started doing country in early to mid 90s, and we established a nice employee rapport. And I had not been there very long till they called a meeting. Mark and Dale, the owners, called a meeting of all the announcers into the conference room, and all these guys had been there for a little while. They'd been around, and so Dale opens up by explaining we hired this firm. May Consultants. They're just showing us ways to streamline and kind of build a position pyramid, chain of command, if you will. And one of the things that May Consulting says we need on the programming side is an operations manager. And that we've decided that person should be you, Denny. Yeah. And so here's the newest of the new guys with all these other guys who'd been here a long time. And I'm thinking, great. What is that? Yeah. Cool. What is this? We've got training manuals. Well, we'll work through that. So,
Okay.
so the new guy ends up, being these guys' supervisor, and that was a little bit awkward at the time. But we worked closely, and we had a wonderful music on-air programming consultant. He was a great guy, which is, you don't say that about music consultants that often, I don't think, in this business, but this one was top-notch. And along comes 1998, and having worked through this, by then there was a lot of deregulation through the FCC about how many stations you could have in a given market.
Exactly.
They broadened that so much. And Mark and Dale, the owners, call me into a meeting and say, listen, we wanted you to be the first guy to know we're selling this company to Marathon Media. I thought, Okay, great. What does that mean? But they could not, these companies that were eager to get into the broadcasting were just backing up the money truck.
Right.
And they didn't hesitate to be honest with me. Said we could not walk away. Remember, this is late 90s. We could not walk away from 4.5 million.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
lot of money.
Yeah, and they approached Western Broadcasting. Marathon Media approached Western Broadcasting, saying we're interested in acquiring these. He says, okay, all right, well, let us put a couple numbers together, and we'll get back to you. So they got back to him right away, and they said we're going to ask 4.5 million, and they kind of just well, you know, thanks, but no thanks. No, that's not. And so Western Broadcasting, well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. If you change your mind, if please let us know. And by the way, that's firm. And it wasn't much longer before they came back and paid their price. So there went local ownership of, really the very first time I had not worked for local ownership. There was a little bit of that at KYLT, but they retained management and programming, stuff like that. So let's see, where does that leave me? KGVO became Western Broadcasting, which became Marathon Media, which became Clear Channel, which became Gap Broadcasting, which became Gap West, which became Town Square Media. Where I am.
And the only thing that changed
Maybe I'm
was
a
the
curse.
check.
I don't know.
Wow.
I worked through that
That
many
is a journey.
ownerships. Yeah.
So, has your title remained kind of the same with operations manager, or
No, no,
what's
no,
it
no. I
been
gave up.
lately?
I gave up. Really, I gave up operations manager once. Once. No, I was still operations manager when Clear Channel acquired us. I think maybe once Gap Broadcasting acquired us. I still had the title, but there really wasn't much substance to it. And I did tell my manager at the time that I'd kinda like to get back on the creative on the sales end. Do you think we could do with kind of that hybrid position and bring somebody else in to be operations manager to oversee all of this? And so that's what happened. 20 plus, almost half of my career really, has been that kind of combo job. And my heart's in programming.
Yep.
My wallet is in sales.
Amen.
And but I've I'm not to, boast, but I've done well with it,
Yeah.
and it gave me, and I don't know if I never felt like I had to justify my college degree. Maybe it validated my college degree because I could at least write and create, and it helped as an announcer, a fairly well known announcer, good or bad. It helped in that it helped me get my foot in the door, and I'm just a ravenous note taker when I'm meeting with somebody and going over things, and so I got pretty good at, okay, well, tell me what, if you did do some advertising, give me some ideas, give me some copy notes here, some things. And a question that I still ask every single client, I said, there's not a right or wrong answer to this, but is there anything about your business? You have let's say it's a type of business. You have a fair amount of competitors in town. Is there anything that your business maybe does that the others don't necessarily do? A good example was an automotive repair guy said, well, if your check engine light comes on, you can bring it in here and we'll do free diagnostics and let you know what's happening. Now,
Perfect.
is he the only place that did that? Probably not. But I said, nobody talks about that. So I was good at looking for little things like that. And then I would get something written and I'd get it produced and I'd go back and say to the prospective client, I said, okay, based on what you told me, Mr. Coleman, here's what I came up with. So now in the clients, oh yeah, I did tell him that. Oh yeah, these are my ideas, aren't they? Yeah, okay. All right. And I won't say it was awkward, but there was probably an advantage to being the guy across the desk with the proposal and being the guy on the recording, the
100%.
commercial you're just listening to.
Well, and you've always done, like, I think this, great production, you
Well,
know.
thanks.
And even on the air, you talked a few minutes ago about not getting any direction from management, and that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you is you are so natural. I used to listen to you and it was like, this guy just talks and it's so cadenced and perfect. And I just kind of wondered where you came up with that. Did you go through a lot of your own air checks or have anybody help you, or just you kind of fell into a rhythm or approach?
Aren't you a gem? If there was a Denny Bedard bobblehead, I'd see to it that you got.
Uh,
You get one, Coleman.
I'm a big fanboy.
I'm very flattered and appreciate the way you said that, and I guess that's if I have a shtick, I've never been, I've never been a gimmick personality. I don't have set elements, set islands that we swim to. Here's the joke of the day, or here's the quick second in history, or here's the birthday. I don't have those things. I've never had those things, and
Yeah.
I guess if I have a skill or a talent, I'm pretty good at just envisioning one person and one person only in that studio with me, and that's who I'm talking to, which maybe lends itself to the very nice things you just said. Is that that has been that's pretty much the extent of my skill set. You know.
Well, it comes across very honestly and, very friendly.
Well, thank you.
It's like,
Thank
I want to listen to this guy. So
you. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
it's funny. It's a small world. You talked a little bit about Randy Morger. He's got a brother named Brian, who's a pretty good artist.
Right.
And
Right.
Brian, as it turns out, knew Keith Koprivica and actually gave him his name of Keith Miller when he was on KYLT.
All
And
right.
Keith was a big fan of Brian, his art, who he is, the type of person that he is. So I've kind of connected to Brian through Facebook, and we've had some really nice conversations. But he shared a few things, and that he did know you through his brother,
Uh-huh.
and he did bring up the fact that you were fraternity brothers.
Right.
And apparently there's a story that you may or may not remember about somebody coming into this very nice former sorority house with nice carpet, and he may have been smoking a cigarette. Do you remember this story?
No, this one I don't remember.
Okay. This, as the story goes, is that you looked at this guy, and apparently he was, kind of came off the street. You may have been having a party or something like that. But you looked at him very seriously and said, if you drop any of those cigarette ashes on this very nice carpet, I will take you outside. Is that something that you would have said?
No, no, I don't think so.
Well,
And I know it's not something Randy Morger would have said either. No, that would have been one of our enforcers, I'm sure.
one of your enforcers. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I just,
That dear old Theta Chi. But no, I'm sorry, I do not remember that.
That's,
I do remember Brian, and I also knew a couple of his sisters. He was they were
neat.
8
Yeah.
kids in the family from Fort Benton,
Right.
as Randy Morger, Mark Randall like to describe it, that sleepy little river town nestled in the Shonkins.
That's perfect. Yeah. The furthest point up the Missouri that
He
Lewis and
was
Clark
just
came.
he was just a razor sharp wit, and I just
Well, that's awesome.
I believe he is still working as some sort of an ombudsman. I think I'm saying the word,
Okay.
a support network for senior citizens
Oh,
in Fort
okay.
Benton. At least last I heard.
That's
Great,
what
great guy.
Randy tells
Yeah,
me. Yep.
he was actually one of 2 fraternity
Randy.
brothers we had from Fort Benton, and I just thought the world of him. So I kind of regret that I've never really tried very hard to stay in touch, but we've at least talked and crossed paths a couple times in those 50 years since college.
Right. That's awesome. So Shakey's and Budget, and then you also picked up kind of a little bit of a high profile part-time job through the University of Montana. Tell me about that.
I did.